Hello, my name is Daniel Smith Ramos, and you're very welcome to my new series, My Genealogy Brick Walls. Today, I would like to focus on my triple times great grandfather John Davis, and I'm going to explain to you why I consider him to be a brick wall. John Davis has actually been a very long-standing brick wall of mine. Several years ago, I had quite a lot of trouble pinpointing his date of death, which I'm lucky enough to say that I was able to find out to clarify through various records, which I'll explain in a minute. And but his origins remain a bit of a mystery. Unfortunately, no image, no portrait of John Davis survives. I have therefore chosen this silhouette, which I retrieved online, to give John a slightly more human look, a slightly more human face as I delve into his personal history. As mentioned, he was my three times great grandfather, and he lived or rather, I should say, he was born in Herefordshire, but the place he was born in lies exactly on the border between Herefordshire and Worcestershire, and in fact, he spent quite a lot of time throughout his life living on both sides of the county border. This is the first document that I have found which actually mentions John Davis by name. He appears here as the father of my great-great-grandmother Jane Davis, who later became Jane Allen. And on this certificate, which is dated from 1846, he is described as a carpenter and as a resident of the village of Colwall, which lies, as mentioned, in between the counties of Herefordshire and Worcestershire. There is not much information we can actually extract from this record beyond the fact that John Davis's wife and Jane's mother was Maria Davis, formerly Parker. This map shows the Upper Witch area between the counties of Herefordshire and Worcestershire. This is actually part of the area known as Upper Colwall within the actual village of Colwall, Herefordshire. And in it you can see a road leading up towards the northeast, which then makes a sharp bend towards the east, and then cuts through that line, then dotted line that goes north to south. That's actually the border between Herefordshire and Worcestershire. So we have Herefordshire on the left and Worcestershire on the right. And Upper Colwall would have been on the Herefordshire, i.e. on the left-hand side of this map. Now, John Davis was from Colwall, so he is considered officially as being born in Herefordshire, but he seems, at least in his adult life, to have lived for most of the time in Upper Colwall and actually around the Witch area. So around that cutting that unites the two counties, that connects the counties of Herefordshire and Worcestershire. It is not unusual, and in fact, as was the case, several of his family members lived and were, for example, baptized on the Worcestershire side rather than the Herefordshire side. This is the second record that I ever found which actually mentions John Davis by name. It is the 1851 census for Colwall, and in it we can see on the top line, living at the witch, we have John Davis, who is the head of the family. He is 46 years old. He is a carpenter and is listed as being born in Colwall. Just below is his wife Maria. She is 37, so she's a few years younger than him. She's from neighbouring Worcestershire, from the village of Kempsey. And with them is their daughter Jane, whose birth certificate we saw a few slides ago, who is 4 at the time and also born in Colwall. There is also a lodger, as you can see, called John Richards, and he is a mason. He's lodging with the family and he's originally from Monmouthshire. There is not very much else we can extract from this record, but at least we have all the data reflected in the previous, i.e., in the birth certificate for Jane, is consistent with the information that we have on this 1851 census. 10 years on the 1861 census, we have again John Davis living at the Witch, in this case described as Witch Road. That's the bottom household listed here, so 4 lines up from the bottom. We have John Davis. He's the head of the family. He's married. He's 56 years old. He's a wood dealer, and he is indeed from Colwall, Herefordshire. Next line down, we have Maria Davis, his wife, obviously married. She's also 46. She's 46. She's a grocer, and she is indeed from the village of Kempsey in Worcestershire. So we have, again, consistent information with the previous census record. Just below is their daughter, my great-great-grandmother, Jane Davis. She's unmarried, being 14 years of age. She is described as scholar, although that information seems to have been crossed out. And we have her birthplace described again as Colwall, Herefordshire. There is someone there called James Howell who is described as a boarder. He's 4 years old and he is indeed a scholar. Now, the fact that there's a 4-year-old scholar boarding with the family makes me think that he is obviously not a paying boarder as such, but he's actually some sort of relative, possibly. But he is not described as a relative, as indeed his relationship to the head of the family is not given as so. He is just mentioned as a boarder, and more importantly, his place of birth is not given. On the 27th of April 1866, John Davis died at the age of 62, and this is his death certificate. You will notice possibly that there is a slight inconsistency with regards to his profession, which is described as an innkeeper rather than a wood dealer or a carpenter, which is the professions that we have seen so far for him on the censuses. Now, this may be a simple error. This could well be absolutely true, and he was indeed an innkeeper, besides being also a wood dealer. But years ago, when I found this death record, I wasn't entirely sure that this was indeed the death record for my John Davis, on the basis not so much of the inconsistency of his age and his place of death, which, as you can see on the left, is also marked as Colwall, but because of the discrepancy in his profession, and also the fact that the person who registered the death was someone called Mary Carless, who was present at the death and who lived at Back Lane in Ledbury. And I had no idea, and as you will imagine from the records we have just seen, I had no idea how this Mary Carless played into John Davis's story, which is why, for a while, I discarded this as a possibility for my John Davis's death. My doubts were eventually dispelled when I was able to get a copy of John Davis's will, which was dated 1864, and in which he indeed mentioned several of his relatives, including Maria Davis, of the which his then wife and obviously later became his widow. Observe that the date of death at the very top, on the top image, 27th of April 1866, matches the date of death on the death record that we have just seen on the previous slide. But furthermore, the will also mentions, interestingly, a few other relatives whom we have not come across so far. John Davis does mention another John Davis, whom we'll call John Davis Jr. for the sake of clarity, his son. He also mentions his grandson, John Davis, the younger, the son of the said John Davis Jr. And interestingly, he also mentions 2 daughters whom we have not heard of before, one of them being Anne, the wife of James Alsop, and Mary, the wife of Richard Carless. And if you remember, the person who registered the death in Ledbury in 1866 was none other than Mary Carless. In other words, John Davis's death was registered by his daughter Mary Carless, née Mary Davis. But where did these children come from if they're not listed on the census with him? Let's move backwards in time to John and Maria's marriage. In 1845, on the 17th of March, John Davis married Maria Parker. Their ages are not given on the marriage certificate, as you can see, but John Davis is described as being a widower, while Maria is a spinster. So she was unmarried, but he had certainly been married at least once before he got married to Maria in 1845. His profession is once again listed as a carpenter. He is living in Colwall at the time, while his wife is living in Lee, which is a parish very close by on the Worcestershire side of the Malvern Hills. And interestingly, we also have for the first time the name of his father, John Davis, who is described as a labourer. Maria's father, William Parker, is mentioned below and is also listed as a labourer. This is the original marriage register, as far as I can tell, because John and Maria's signatures are actually found below. They're not actual transcriptions, but they seem to be original signatures. So at least I have a good idea that they were both able to read and write. This document may prove crucial later on, but let's now see if we can find John Davis's previous, i.e., first marriage. His marriage to Maria being obviously his at least second marriage. And lo and behold, here we have John Davis's first marriage. It took place in Little Malvern, which is very close to Colwall, in 1825, and it was between him, a resident of Colwall in the county of Hereford. He's described as a bachelor, so we know he wasn't married before. And his wife's first wife's name was Anne Wilts. She is described as a spinster, and they were married in the local parish church by banns on the 10th of March, 1825. And we have there their signature. So again, we have John's signature, which proves that he was literate. And we also have the names of two witnesses who, for the time being, I have not been able to link as relatives to either bride or groom. So this at least already gives us a date of when John Davis first got married before he remarried 20 years later to Maria Parker. There are 20 years in between his two marriages. Considering the information I was able to extract from the will in 1864, I was able also to locate through the censuses and also later through the parish records the baptism of actually four children that John had with his first wife Anne. So the first daughter that they had was called Mary, and she was born in Little Malvern in 1826. The second child, although I haven't actually seen the original record, but there are transcripts online which are consistent with the information on the census, giving me the place of birth. John and Anne had a daughter called Anne in 1828 while they were living in Colwall, followed by another daughter not mentioned in his will called Hannah, who actually died in 1852. She died young. She died at the age of 22. And lastly, they had a son called John, who is mentioned in the will, as we have seen, and he was actually born in the city of Worcester. Now, interestingly, here John's profession is given as a turnpike gatekeeper, not as an innkeeper, not as a wood dealer or a carpenter, but again, the fact, if we can believe that he was an innkeeper and a carpenter and a wood dealer, there is no reason to not believe the fact that he may also have worked for a while, especially if he was living in Worcester at the time, as a turnpike gatekeeper. He may have gone there in search of work, and he may have ended up working in something entirely different from his usual line of business. So we have now the name of John's 5 children. In total, we have 4 children from his first marriage: Mary, Anne, Hannah, and John. And of course, we have his fifth daughter through his second marriage, Jane, my great-great-grandmother. This schematic family tree shows John's 2 marriages. We have his 2 wives at the top, Anna Wilkes and Maria Parker, and then we have his 5 children listed, also with the names of his children's spouses. So we have Mary married to Richard Carless, Anne married to Jane Dorser, John Davis, who married twice, Harriet Weaver first, and then M. Bromfield, and then Jane Davis married John Allen. We now come to the part that is strictly speaking my family brick wall. I want to know who John Davis's parents were. You will recall that on the 1845 marriage, his father's name was given as John Davis, labourer, but very little information exists to point out the name of his mother, or indeed to confirm who his true parents were. I have no particular reason to not believe that John Davis was not the name of his father. However, bearing in mind that John was born in Colwall roughly at some point between 1800 and 1810, to put it broadly, there are in fact 2 possible candidates who were called John Davis and who were born in around that period at the right place. This would be the first candidate. We have the baptism certificate at the very top on the 26th of June 1803. John, the base son, i.e. the illegitimate son of Mary Davis. Unfortunately, there is no information as to the father's name. We don't even know whether Mary is a spinster, whether she's married, whether she's a widow. We just have the name Mary Davis. There are, however, a couple of records located in Hereford archives which do actually mention Mary Davis and her base child. Unfortunately, it doesn't actually specify that it's a boy and that it's called John, but this is something I am inferring. And we see that a John Lucy, who was also someone who lived in Cole, paid child support to Mary Davis for her child in 2 different years, in 1808 and 1809. That's the 2 records that we can see in the middle and the bottom of the image. There is indeed, there are indeed a few baptisms that support the notion that there was a Mary Davis, possibly born in 1764, although this is still to be confirmed, who actually gave birth to 3 children called Martha, Sarah, and John in 1792, 1801, and 1803, respectively. Now, this is not this has not been 100% proved. I have not seen the original records myself, except the baptism of John, but it would seem consistent with the fact that Mary received support for her illegitimate child in 1808 and 1809, that she was receiving money from John Lucy, very probably the biological father of her youngest child, John, and therefore we could understand that, or we could infer that John Lucy was the father of John Davis, which could explain why John Davis, when he married Maria Parker in 1845, mentioned that his father was called John Davis. Now, he had obviously to keep his own last name, he couldn't alter that at the time, but by stating that his father's first name was called John, he was in a way mixing 2 identities. He was mixing his own last name, Davis, with the true first name of his father, who was, of course, called John, like him. So everything seemed to be perfectly normal. Now, I did mention earlier that there was a second possible candidate for my John, born between 1800 and 1810, and that would be the son of John and Phoebe Davis, who was baptized in Colwall on the 5th of April 1807. That's the top image that we can see there. Unfortunately, I don't have any documentary proof that confirms that this is the John that made it to the later records. In other words, I don't have him on the census later on. John Sr., as it were, and his wife Phoebe are indeed mentioned on the 1841 census in Colwall. They were living in a cottage called Friends Hall, which still stands to this day, albeit with a different name. And they are listed there with two of their younger children, with Richard and with Henry. And in fact, below you will see a simplified family chart of John and Phoebe's children. We have Harriet, married to George Lissaman. We have John, the one mentioned above. Richard, mentioned in the census. Amy, James, William, Charles, and Henry, who again is mentioned on this census. But the question is the John baptized in 1807 the John that later married Anne Wilkes and Maria Parker? Or is it the John Davis baptized in 1803 to an unmarried mother called Mary Davis, my real ancestor? That is the question. That is my brick wall. I have split here into three columns the information that I have for John Davis in the center, my ancestor, and the information compared to the actual records that I found if I were to take one candidate or the other to see if the information matches the records. Now, if we focus on the central column here, we have John Davis born in around 1802 or 1806. This is based mainly on his age at death, but also on the ages he gave in the censuses. He is possibly the son of John Davis, a labourer, although again this information is questionable, possibly. He was married by banns in March of 1825 and had 4 children with his first wife. He certainly remarried by banns again in 1845 and had 1 daughter with his second wife. His age on the 1841 census, which was taken in June of that year, is given as 35, which means, as you all well know, that his actual age could be anywhere between the ages of 39 and 35. 10 years later, in 1851, he stated that he was 46, which again would match the information on the census taken 10 years previously. And again in April 1861, he stated that he was 56. So again, pretty consistently, he was stating that he was born around the same time. So we're talking about 1805 approximately, depending again on when he was born or when he knew that he was, when his birthday was. And according to his eldest daughter, he dies at the age of 62 in April of 1866. So again, we have a birth year of approximately 1804 to 1805. Now, if we take, and I'm looking here at the column on the left-hand side, candidate 1, which I've highlighted in red. If we took the first candidate, the one born earliest, the one who was baptized on the 26th of June 1803. We know that he was the illegitimate son of Mary Davis and possibly of John Lucy. We know, or at least we can almost be certain, that he was still alive in 1809. In March 1825, when John married his first wife, this candidate would have been 21. When the 1841 census was taken in June, he would have been 37 or 38, depending on when he was born, because we only have his baptism date. In 1851, in March 1851, assuming he was born after March, he would have been 47, going on 48. In April 1861, in early April 1861, he would have been probably 57, going on 58. and in April 1866, when he died, he would have been 62, probably going on 63. I find that the dates provided here are fairly consistent with the information that I have of my actual John Davis. There is a year up or down, but the disparity is not too great. However, if we turn to candidate number 2, I'm looking now at the right-hand side column, candidate 2 highlighted in blue. We know that he was baptized on the 5th of April 1807. He was the son of John and Phoebe Davis. We haven't got any information confirming that he was still alive in the subsequent decades, but we do know that if this were to be my ancestor, he would have been 17, going on 18 in March 1825, when he married Anne Wilkes. Now, you could think, well, that's too young to marry, but I'm very grateful here to another researcher who's pointed out that consent was only needed to be recorded if the couple were marrying by license, and only then if one or all other of them needed parental or other legal consent, which would usually be because one of them was under 21. However, as we know, John Davis and Anne Wilkes were married by banns in 1825, and based on the information provided, it is absolutely no problem that the groom could have been 17 or thereabouts when he married, and he would not have required parental consent to do so. Moving on, when the 1841 census was taken in June 1841, he would have been 34. He would have been 44 on the 1851 census, which, if we compare it to the actual 46 that he actually provided, is off by 2 years. On the 1861 census, he would have been 54, not 56 as he stated, and he would have been actually 59 when he died in April 1866, not 62 as stated by his daughter. Now, there is an interesting detail here also, which I've added here at the end, which is that there is a possible DNA match. Someone who shares 74 centimorgans across 5 segments with my father's first cousin. And the match would be his fourth cousin, which falls perfectly well between the average amount of DNA that fourth cousins can share. However, I am not necessarily taking that as full proof that this reinforces the theory that candidate number 2 is indeed my John Davis, simply because the DNA match has ancestors from various villages in Herefordshire, which is where my father's cousin is from. And in fact, there are several non-paternity events or false paternity events, several illegitimate births, and it could well be that there is a double link to this DNA match on a different line, which could make their relationship between these two matches appear stronger than it actually is. So I'm not necessarily taking that as at face value just yet. But here we have basically a comparison of the three candidates, or rather the two candidates to be my John Davis. I don't know what you think, but I am inclined to believe that my John Davis is candidate 1 as opposed to candidate 2. I don't have any strong evidence to suggest one rather than the other. Just because the dates and the ages match does not necessarily mean that it couldn't be candidate 2. But I do have some misgivings as to the fact that there are no other DNA matches for candidate 2. Secondly, not that I found any on candidate 1, but again, I don't have a larger family tree for candidate 1 because he had 2 illegitimate sisters, as we saw earlier. And perhaps more importantly, the ages, as I said, do tend to match each other pretty well. But it could be one or the other. It could even be a third candidate that I haven't yet found out, although I find that rather improbable at this stage. But I would really like to hear your comments and your thoughts on this. There is, of course, and I think this will be the answer to this question. I think I still need to uncover additional records to that will hopefully confirm whether candidate one or candidate two is indeed my ancestor. I would ideally like to find a will, for example, or some sort of reference to John Davis from a close relative which would uh, prove that he is one or the other. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to find such a record. I doubt even whether such a record exists, but it's an interesting theory, and I would really appreciate your feedback and your thoughts on these different theories, and also to point me in the direction of alternative research avenues that I have not yet explored. So thanks for listening. I'm sorry for the slightly erratic narrative here, but this has been pulled together. I have pulled together this presentation very quickly without a script. So I'm just really looking forward to hearing your comments on this. Thanks very much and have a Merry Christmas.